Hey guys, Marcelo and Nashoza here, back again for another video. This time, I'm going to do something very special. I have my friend Dan here, Star Trek friend of mine. We are going to actually discuss one of my favorite films of the last couple of years. I unfortunately didn't get to go see this film in IMAX, which was a tremendous disappointment for me because that was my plan. But today we are going to discuss the Damien Chazelle film First Man, which is the movie about the Americans' journey to land a man on the moon for the first time in the 1960s. So, Dan, you being the astronaut aficionado among us today on the show, what were you thinking when you first heard that they were going to do a movie about Neil Armstrong and his journey to become the first man on the moon?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show and on the video for the first time. What an excellent film that we have an opportunity to discuss. But I got it. I was excited because, Neil Armstrong is uh, a human hero. He's not just an American hero, he's humanity's hero. And so my biggest concern was what parts of his legacy aren't we already privy to? Because Neil was a very personal, private person. He kept to himself, especially even after, notably after walking on the moon, he kind of rescinded himself from the fame of it and tried to live just a regular, ordinary life. And so I was hoping that the man that we had the image of, that his legacy would hold through a biopic like this. Now, I don't know, did they dig too deep into his warts or not? But it seems like they came across with him as, very well. And I'm sure the estate had some hand in the telling of the story, but I couldn't help but be excited because everything about Neil Armstrong turns out to have been like perfect for the job. And it's just, sometimes you land the casting so well that you can't question it. Were we talking fiction, it's Chris Reeve as Superman. When you're talking the real world, it's Neil Armstrong flying the mission to the moon. Those two things I don't think could have been picked any better.
The one thing that I was really surprised at after I saw the film is that a lot of people were complaining about Ryan Gosling's portrayal of Neil Armstrong, that he was just too stoic. Like he had no emotion on his face. He was like very very monotone and bzz, flat. And I did a little research because I was like, that was a very very interesting choice because I was a person thinking that if you're a pilot and if you're trying to do something as momentous as they were trying to do, like you would have some emotion about it. But on further inspection, I was like, after I did some research, I was like, Neil was really like that. So Neil was really turned off and sort of like flat, one note. He was very composed. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
really show emotion on his face. And he was very, very isolated, even from his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that really surprised me. But after I read the research, I was really happy that Damien Chazelle, the director, and Ryan Gosling chose to do that because the really it would have been really easy for them to do a sensationalized version of the character and push up his emotions and make him all excited. But I'm really glad that they chose to keep that aspect of him firmly planted in reality.
Absolutely. Well, to that point, and there are a couple of things that I noticed while watching this. This was only my second time catching up this. I like to rewatch as close to possible. One, I tend to procrastinate. Two, it's nice to keep it fresh in the head. So I was watching this, right up until the end before we started to record. And one of the things that I was able to take note of here versus the first time, because the first time I'm just trying to get, how good is this? What are we doing?
Right.
Absorbing the story. And one of the things that I noticed regarding the direction is the camera work in those tense, tight moments when you are in Jiminy 8 with them, and it's the camera is right, and you feel crushed in, right? And when he's in the X-15 at the beginning, and it's cramped and dark, and you feel that. And so I couldn't imagine a director who took that level of care to frame the shots in the cinema with a cinematographer who understands how the camera work works, and an actor in that situation not making the conscious choice to play the character that way.
Mm-hmm.
I trust that, especially an actor of Ryan Gosling's caliber, who's only ever shown, he's shown that he can run the gamut of emotion. He can be passionate, and I think where some of the audience may have missed the mark is either they came in expecting to learn everything they ever wanted to know about Neil Armstrong by watching this movie, which is not going to cut it, or they just didn't understand who he was before they saw this movie. Um, because I felt like Gosling played it right to the point. But knowing what I know, knowing that Neil was just a stoic person, and that literal ice water runs through his veins, that doesn't mean he lacked emotion. And I think that we saw that in the case where after the loss of their daughter Karen, he had that trinket, her bracelet, and he put that in a place where he puts his things. Right, that was in his desk in his drawer. After he tucked away the journals that he kept regarding her illness, and he set those aside, and he made his space, and he had his moment. He sobbed, he cried, he expressed himself as a father right there. And then it ends with him leaving that bracelet on the moon. That's not dispassionate. That's a deeply thoughtful act. And Neil considered that. I have no doubt. You being, if you care for anything in this world, a pet, a plant, doesn't matter. You put forethought into that thing's care, right? And so he probably carried that idea with him through that entire journey that he went on as an astronaut. If I make it there, I'm going to take this with me.
No, but the really interesting thing about, you mentioned the direction and the directorial choices in this film. I mean, let's start at the beginning. When the film first starts, you really get a sense of being in the plane and a sense of claustrophobia, because the brilliant thing that the director of this film does is that when Neil or anyone is in a plane, you never leave the cockpit. You never leave the inside of the plane. So you never see that traditional movie shot of the vehicle flying through
Mm-hmm.
space, except one time.
Yep.
The first time, and the only time he does it, is in the actual launch of the rocket going to the moon for the first time. That's the only time that he shows the outside of the space vehicle.
Yep.
And I absolutely love the sound design of this movie. You mentioned it. It's loud, it's
Mm-hmm.
creaky as hell, and it is terrifying.
Yep.
It is so claustrophobic. I mean, first of all, the movie starts out, and you're like, okay, so he's in some sort of flying vehicle, but I didn't realize that he was attached to another plane.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't realize, because I thought that he was in one plane, but I didn't realize that another plane had to take him up to an altitude, and then he had to release, and then he had to go up, and I was like, what the hell is he doing? And I was
Yeah.
watching it, and I'm like, oh, he's attached to another plane, and now he's going up. I'm like, holy shit!
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love when he reaches like the tip of the atmosphere, and he flips a switch, and that switch flattens him out. And I'm like, holy crap! I'm like, oh, it was just so amazing. Do you have any highlights from that opening sequence?
Oh yeah. Again, like you said, the choices made as far as depicting in flight, um, you get only ever get angles that the pilot themselves may have been able to see. Like catching a reverse out of the rear view mirror, because they have those. They are able to see what's behind them. But like you said, we start off in this space. We have no idea what's going on. It's just rattles. It's metal creaking against metal, and you hear chatter on the radio that makes sense in a context, but you're not sure what context you're in. And like you said, when you realize that he's attached to a launch plane, and this rocket plane is about to detach and fire off, And for the audience, a little bit of history. These early rocket planes, they didn't take off on themselves. If you've ever watched like Virgin Galactic launch one of their space planes, there's a plane that carries them to a certain altitude, and then drops off, and the rocket carries it on up. And that's what happened here with the X-15. And like you said, though, I felt like I was in there with him. That's the sense that I got, right? That sense of, okay, I'm about to flip the switch. Did it work? And then we pan down into the horizon, and you see the atmosphere, and there is absolutely no reaction from Neil in that moment. Just to kind of take a breath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the mission is, of course, to get to, I guess, 140,000 feet, the edge of space, and then be able to get the plane back down. Of course, we encounter the first of many of Neil's cool cucumber moments where, as he goes to descent, of course, he bounces and starts to drift back up into space.
He starts a balloon.
Yeah, starts to balloon up instead of breaking down the nose. And, he in the moment takes the time to pause, consider the situation, and just devise a solution that I'm not sure, any pilot that gets to that seat is a good pilot, great pilot, best pilot. But do they all have the wherewithal or the acumen to figure out how to drop that plane back into the atmosphere?
I mean, I'm not going to speak for any NASA pilot who works for NASA now, or who worked for NASA when Neil was there, but I'm not sure if every pilot could work under those stressful conditions, because I love the way that Neil figures out how to get the nose of the plane back down, because he starts flicking the switches, and I'm like, when he uses the thrusters to sort of rejigger the plane to the correct angle to start his descent back down to the earth, I was like, that's genius, because he used the thrusters to move the space vehicle, and I was like, that's genius. That's really smart. Also, I find it really funny that when he's making his descent back down to Earth, the NASA guy, or the guy on the radio, says, "You seem to be a bit short," and I'm like, and I was like. And I was like, no shit, he's a bit short.
He's a bit short. Well, okay, so there are two things from this scene that play out later that you just highlighted a connection to. One of them I was going to point out later is that, we don't experience Neil's emotion about breaking that horizon or the horizon in the moment. But later, when he's defending the program, he uses that moment and says, when I broke over the horizon, you can see the planet as the planet. It changes your perspective. We should explore for the sake of exploration, but I don't think that's all we're going to find. Mm-hmm. So there's the emotion. It pays off. That's good writing. That's good directing. That's good acting. And again, that he came up a little shorter. He's coming in a little short. That comes up again later when Buzz, being an asshole, says, "Oh, he probably came up a little short." They're at a funeral. After one of their friends, the other civilian pilot who joined the program with Neil, has died in an X-35, their super fast planes that they drive.
The X-35,
the space planes that NASA astronauts get to fly whenever they want. They can just book one and take off. Watch For All Mankind. You'll learn what we're talking about. But it comes up again, like, hey, that played. Again, maybe he came up a little short. And by short in this context, when Neil comes back down, he's about to smack into the side of a mountain unless he gains control. But I was thinking, I didn't quite understand, and getting into the hard science of it, I didn't quite understand how the maneuver that he made was able to get him back into the atmosphere until you and I were just talking about it. What he did was he tilted the plane on its side, mm-hmm. and that changed the coefficient of how the drag and the lift worked, and it started to allow it to pull itself back down into the atmosphere. He sliced his way back down. With the edge of the wing, which is just, I wouldn't have thought of it. I'd be dead floating off in space now.
Yeah, no, I don't. I love space stuff, as you know. I love space stuff, but I don't generally think about the logic or the math to flying a plane, but my feeling is that when he turned the plane, he got the plane back in the gravity of the planet,
Hmm.
and that took him back
Brought him
down,
back down. Yeah.
brought him
Well,
back
the
down.
the key with atmosphere is when you're coming back into it. If you're not at the right angle, of course, you're going to scoop
Up,
yourself off of it,
yeah.
and you have to be going slow enough for Earth to catch you, and then slow enough that you actually enter the atmosphere, and then of course you enter the whole friction thing, and whether or not you got enough protection to not burn up. But and that was another cool effect taken back to the launch of the rocket plane when the nose started to heat up and he looks down at his feet and you can see the glow, and this is just the rocket pressing against the atmosphere to get up, not
Up.
come back down. So the amount of force that rocket is generating to generate that much friction to push out of here, all of it just so well done.
The other thing that I found really interesting is that when he landed, because another great directorial choice throughout this whole opening sequence, Neil doesn't say one word. He doesn't
Mm-mm,
say anything.
mm-mm.
You hear the NASA people on the radio saying, Neil, you're going too high, or Neil, you're ballooning, and then you hear that one guy say, you're coming in too short. But he doesn't say one word
Nope.
until he comes back down again, and he just says, "I'm down," and I'm like,
Yeah,
"That's it? You
cool as a
just went through?
cucumber. Yeah,
Is that you just went through that hellish thing where you almost died, and that's it?" I'm like,
that's it.
"Okay, that's what type of movie this is gonna be." But also, the other thing that I found very interesting is that when the NASA folks, or not the NASA folks, when the Army folks came to check on him, there was this one guy who mentioned that he's reckless. He's crashed 3 planes this month, and I'm like, okay, this flight must have been like his third flight in like the last couple of weeks, because I'm wondering why the hell is this guy questioning Neil's competence about getting this plane down to earth. At least he got the plane back down. At
Yeah,
least he
yeah,
didn't die. So
right.
so I was so I was wondering, was this flight a part of a bigger thing that Neil was testing, or something?
So, like, first of all, rocket planes were developed early on in order to break test breaking the sound barrier. And one of the folks there, I think it's actually Chuck Yeager, who's questioning Neil's competency, and Chuck being the test pilot who broke the sound barrier back in the
Right.
day.
Hmm.
And obviously we're going past that now because we see a speedometer read Mach 3 plus, so we beat that. But again, the point of test piloting, and we see this moment come up again. Here's a setup, and I don't know if you can call it setup and payoff because they're very related, but we have barely getting to the ground in a untested vehicle. It's meant to do something special. Later on, of course, Neil famously ejected at literally the last possible moment before dying in the lunar lander test vehicle. I mean, if y'all go watch there's video, there's legit video of it happening. He is actually, an immeasurable amount of time away from death, and cool as a cucumber the whole time. Gets up and he's like, "Huh, it's the only way we can test it. Build me another one." you know, I mean, if he was a smoker, he'd have been like, "It's no big deal,"
Yeah, it's no big deal. Yeah.
And I think too, just talking about this and talking about this perception and the portrayal of the character of Neil Armstrong as dissociated and disconnected in an emotional way. In a misdirected context, he would have been a psychopath, right? These are the kind of people who can disconnect themselves from their emotion and commit acts of greatness or acts of depravity, right? And thankfully, Neil chose goodness, because someone who can be that cool, collected, and methodical, could go a completely other direction. They made a whole TV show about it called Dexter. It's the very same kind of collected, cool thinking that misdirected could lead to disaster. But in our case, we got Neil Armstrong, so not
Yeah.
a bad
Um,
shake.
the other thing that I found really really interesting is the way that Neil confronts real world problems, because early on in this film, we understand that one of his children is dying of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And Neil's way to deal with this is to lock himself in this wonderful small cabin that his family lives in,
Mm-hmm.
and he has these books in his office about how he's going to deal with the problem. And until the very last moment, he's making calls with friends that he knows. He actually has a plan to take his daughter to Canada
Mm-hmm.
for some experimental treatments to see if this cancer thing can be beat. But
Yep.
unfortunately, she passes away very, very early on in the film. And I really like the visual. I mean, it's a terrifying visual if you're a parent.
Right.
I really like the visual of the small coffin being buried into the ground.
Again, the
And
very tight, close look on the mother's face as it
mhm,
happens. You know,
yeah,
somehow they've managed to tall screen this widescreen movie in the
mhm.
moments where they framed her sorrow, and like you said, watching this tiny casket descend.
Ah, so great. But the other thing that I found very, very unique about that scene is that you mentioned the mother's face. She's losing it. The son looks sad as hell. But Neil is standing there going, he's really not showing much. He's just sitting there, or standing there. I'm sorry, taking it all in. And it isn't until later when they're at the wake,
Hmm.
and Neil is sort of walking around, and one of his sons, who is about 5 or 6 years old, I guess, comes up to him and he says, "Can you play with me outside?"
Yeah.
And he just says, "I have to help your mother with something." But the very next scene that we see is him going back into his office. He actually has her little bracelet, and he puts it
Hmm.
away in his drawer.
Yep.
He takes all his paperwork. He puts that away in his drawer. He closes the curtains. He sits down, and then for the first time in the movie, you see Neil Armstrong, or Ryan Gosling as Neil Armstrong, open up, and he
Hmm.
loses it.
Hmm.
But he's
Yeah.
in his office by himself, and I'm like, this guy is emotional, but he doesn't like to show emotion around other people, I guess,
Right.
because up
And
until
that's
this point,
that's an effect of the time too. People, unfortunately, we have decades of toxic masculinity being taught as men, or being raised as boys to hide our emotions. And Neil was 100% an effect of that. But I think that he knew himself to be an emotional person. But several things that he did in that moment, even if it were a story, even if it were acting, in that character of Neil in that moment as a father, as a husband, he he let his son know that I'm still here. I can't come play with you right now. I need to help mom. So hey, I'm going to help someone so that it's okay. Um, but then just hiding the fact that he's going to help himself, which in the tale will help mom because he's making himself a healthy person. He's finding his way to heal. And like you said, he had his way of managing his daughter's illness through cataloging the steps that her symptoms, cataloging the steps they've taken to help her, so that he has this information. Being data driven, he has this information to give to that doctor in Canada. Hopefully, here's everything we've tried so far. As a technician, when people bring me their trouble, one of the greatest things they can bring to me as a help is, here's all the things I've already tried, and I'm at the end of it, right? And we see again this payoff down the line when he's learning basic rocket physics, and he's like, it doesn't make sense if you push it this way. You feel like it ought to do the other thing, but if you follow the math, it works out. And that just shows his methodical way of breaking the problem down, even if it has to deal with a dying loved one. That his process is to piecemeal the situation into manageable chunks, and then find the collective solution. And we
mhm.
see that way he processes his emotions, the way he processes actual physical, real world impact.
Well, I guess a week after his little girl died, Neil thinks it's a good idea to go back to work,
Yeah,
and which is not a good thing. Just to make it clear, after you suffer a great loss, it's not a good idea to go back to work the very
it is
next week.
not. It is not.
Anyway, his I guess supervisor grounds him. He prevents him from getting on any flights, and that's when Neil gets a brilliant idea of submitting his name in for this new program at NASA where they're going to do
Mm-hmm.
something humongously special. And on the first day there, he meets a great guy, another civilian pilot. He goes, "Are you here for the NASA program?" And the guy says, "Yeah, I'm here for the NASA program." And when Neil goes in to interview for the job, they're asking him very, very complicated questions, and they're
Mm-hmm.
asking him this and that and this and that. And I love the way that he sort of sits there, very calm, very cool, like a cucumber, like you've said various times in various times in this video. And he just stands there and sits there and answers every one of their questions, measured, very calmly and very seriously. And at the end of the interview, there's this one guy that asks him one question. He goes, "So, with the loss of your daughter, are we to believe that if we give you this job, do you think that will have an effect? Or, will the loss of your daughter have any effect on your ability to do what we want you to do?" And I'm like, "You son of a bitch, how dare you?"
Yep.
And Neil just says, very calmly, he says, "Oh, well, I, I, I would be correct in assuming, I would be wrong in assuming it wouldn't have any effect." And
Yep.
he sort of like says, "Fuck you," but in a nice way.
And that's exactly the point of that question. Even if it was for a narrative point, a lot of this we just have to expect is scripted by an author to convey a story. These biopics are dramatized, so there's anecdote and there's probably truth in some of these things, but in that moment, the point to that question from that person to Neil was to rile him up. He wanted to see what kind of emotional response if I just drop, "Hey, dead daughter," right? Am I right? And Neil's like, "You are correct. I do have a dead daughter, and you would be a fool to assume that that would not have an impact on my performance." I mean, he's like, "Yeah, she's dead. It's a reality, and yeah, it will affect me." But you know, the obvious that you asked the question, and I was able to maintain cool through that, which was absolutely rude of that dude. But that was the point of it, was to charge him up emotionally, see how he would respond to being challenged in that regard, and 100% pass the test, of course, as he's not phased.
So he ends up getting picked for the program, and one of the first things that we see, I really think, is a great scene. But I've done some research, or I heard the commentary, and I understand that the filmmakers sort of did this to sort of put this cool scene in here. But I understand that the machine that they go in and they start to train in didn't get invented until after they landed on the moon. I don't know what the name of the machine
Oh,
is.
the gyro machine. They
Yeah,
did
yeah.
have some. There were some, or at least if I have my facts correct regarding the like the early right stuff, like we discussed a little bit before recording. They did have similar test vehicles, but it was the cyclotron, right? It's the thing that would spin you around,
Yeah.
and it wasn't the six-axis thing, so that they could learn to control a flat spin. That was the point of this trainer. And I've been in one, and holy
Ooh.
cow, it's not happening. It is. You think you can? You think you? Well, I don't think the one I was in was to be able to reorient yourself. I think it was just to go through a personal hell for 5 minutes. But yeah, when you're in a six-axis spin, good luck, buddy. And the again, this is maybe a bit of apocrypha or anachronism in that, like you said, this machine may not have been invented until after the fact, but it's a setup and a payoff again, because we will come back to why that moment is important later on in the film, right? And again, it's to prove Neil's resolve, right? The
And his
six-axis
intelligence.
machine, exactly. And this six-axis machine is meant to simulate yourself in a flat spin. You get to almost 4 Gs, and a human will pass out because of the lack of ability to pump blood to your brain. If you don't understand, like all the blood goes to your feet. That's why pilots wear pressure suits that keeps the blood in the place where the thinking stuff happens. And so once you pass out, of course, it's dead city for you
You're
and your
dead.
passengers. Yeah, and so it's to show that Neil can do it, and then he asks to go again because he's a torture animal, I guess. But then in the end, they show us that he's human because he's in there tossing cookies as anyone would after such an experience. So he shows his metered resolve in the moment, but then again we see him in a human moment right after.
No, and I really like the relationship that develops between him and Ed White.
Yeah.
Throughout the film, because all throughout the film, him, Ed White, and a couple other astronauts, of one who will come up very, very shortly because I don't like him at all. One who will
Don't
come
like
up
his
very,
betrayal.
very shortly. Yeah, I mean, he must have been a great guy. I hope, because I don't know, but
Yeah.
but the way that he was portrayed in this movie was like a dick. So we're gonna talk about him in just a couple of minutes here. But so there's Neil, there's Ed White, and there's a bunch of other astronauts. And the thing that really made me interesting, or was really interesting to me, is that there was a very fierce competition about who was going to get to do what.
Exactly.
And
the crews were all on rotations.
Right. And one of the first things that they had to do was to figure out how to dock a particular spaceship to at a particular point in space.
Right.
Right. And this is unfortunately at the point of the film when one of the people that Neil first met when he entered the program on a test flight or doing the same thing dies.
Right.
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 Ed White comes to his house and he says, "Listen, this guy died trying to do this thing."
Right.
And I love how, because at that point Neil was playing with his son. He was building a model of wasn't it the San Francisco Bridge or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I love how he sort of kind of turns off. But I love that his wife really notices when Neil comes in. She notices that something is wrong, and she just goes, "Who is it?"
Yeah.
Right. And I love the fact that she understands that, obviously Neil wouldn't be able to focus, but she doesn't tell their son to go screw off.
Right.
She just goes, Daddy has something to do right now, and he'll play with you later. But I love the way that they treat their kids in this movie, because a lot of parents in difficult situations would freak out. But I love that these individuals, or the way that they're portrayed in the movie, are very caring to their children, and they really love their kids.
Well, and as a parent of human children, I try not to. I'm very careful not to play that card in a it makes me special kind of way. I know as humans we all have people and things that we care for, but understanding when you're bringing up a person who is going to have to exist in this world, we coddle the youngsters more than they deserve, because a lot of adults don't credit children for also just being humans. They are thinking, feeling tiny versions of yourself. And literally the way to help children and small kids is to physically put yourself on their level. You will gain so much ground. You will gain so much trust with a child if you are physically eye to eye with them. Bring yourself low to them. Don't be an adult over them. Be a person in front of them. And be honest with them. Kids have amazing bullshit smellers. They will route you out to straight away. They will call you on it, and they will call you on your unwillingness to be called out on it. They show that here, because think about the worst of the worst in this element, right? They've played Pollyanna with these kids. They said, Daddy does, fun things. He gets to go into space. And then something tragic happens, and these kids are devastated. They no longer trust their mother, the only parent they have left, because they shined them on. And she, we get to the point where she says, "You have to tell them that you might not come home. They think you're going to the moon and coming right back, and they don't understand everything that's going to happen. And you are going to be the one to sit down, and you are going to tell them everything that's going to happen." And as someone who's worked with kids as a taekwondo instructor, being honest, being upfront, being direct, kids appreciate it. They get it. They're much more capable than we give them credit for as tiny people. Just make yourself a tiny person with them.
Be a tiny person.
Yeah, be a tiny person.
But as a person who doesn't have live people in this world that I'm responsible for, I really think it's important to treat your tiny people, as you put it, with respect.
Mm-hmm.
Show them, give them respect, and hope that they, based on your example, they'll give it right back to you.
They tend to. That's the key. Is like, we always talk about give respect to get respect. And it's easy. Start with positive intent. Start with a little bit of respect. Don't dumb down your language unless the child asks you to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speak like an adult. And so they say, "I don't know what that word means." Well, there's an opportunity to teach. But to your point, yeah, they make it, they understand where the limit for a child is as to what, how they can perceive a situation, but they don't obfuscate the truth of it. They encapsulate the truth in a way that's digestible, but they don't hide it, right? And that comes out again later when we are on the Gemini 8 mission, and Capcom shuts off the radio that the wife is listening to, and she's like, nope, you don't do that. I can handle it, right? Yeah. Treat me like a person. And I think that just pays out as far as the kids too, because we don't tend to think a lot about the wives of the astronauts, especially during this time. And it's that we're not quite there yet, but there's a part of the story that's told visually when I think it's Ed's wife, after the tragedy on the pad.
We're not there.
She's standing there at the trunk, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we'll come to that. But yeah. The way they just they handle the truth with the kids is an example to anyone who wants to encourage small children.
Also, I think that it's very, very. I think that we should just point out just here for a second. Look, a lot of things have been said about astronauts and how great they are and how successful they are and how brilliant pilots they are and this and that, but I don't think that a lot of attention has been given to the families of pilots and astronauts, because look, if you're going to space, good on you and you have things to focus on, but your family, they're going through shit too. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very, very important to acknowledge that it really takes a strong family member to deal with all the bullshit that not only you're dealing with, but you're sort of putting onto them. Yep. as subconsciously. I don't think a lot of family members or spouses are given enough credit for the shit that they have to deal with.
Right. Well, and that too, given the social constructs of the time, having to bear all of this burden while being the perfect at-home wife, mom / keeping the house together, wearing the flower dresses and the pumped up hair, and still having to do all that stuff that society demanded of women at the time, mothers and wives, let alone the extra stress of being an astronaut wife. Knowing that your loved one's literal job is to ride a bomb that you hope blows up the right way. That's literally all we're hoping for with a rocket, is that we told the bomb to go off and it decided to go in the right direction. It's a 10,000 gallon shaped charge.
Yeah, to be honest, look, I wouldn't be surprised if when Neil entered the astronaut program, I wouldn't be surprised if he signed a couple things, because being that type of person who says, okay, You want me to do this thing? You want me to get inside this rocket and you want me to hope it doesn't blow me to bits? I'm
Mm-hmm.
cool with that.
I'm cool with that, but we're gonna sign some paperwork first. Um,
Yeah.
I think too, if we were being practical back in the day, um, part of these astronauts, one were selected, especially like the original Mercury 7, were selected for their test pilot prowess. They were all military, and I think if NASA had been able to sell it at the time, they probably would have elected for bachelors rather than family folk. But we have to sell that. It was in the middle of the Cold War. We have to sell the nuclear family idea as part of beating the Russians, so on and etc. Which we forget. This entire film is backdropped against the actual space race, the Cold War space race to beat the Russians to the moon. And as is noted, up until Gemini, they capped us at every potential milestone. First artificial object in space, first human in space, first woman in space, first EVA in space. So we had to get on the ball, and that's where we get to the Gemini program to accomplish that. But I think they would have picked bachelors if they had had a chance to just avoid the whole, well, there's nobody left behind at least. But that's not how we did things as Americans.
Mm-hmm. No, I can't imagine, waking up every day and saying, "Hey, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to strap myself to a rocket built by the lowest bidder
Exactly.
and hope I
One
don't
of my
blow
favorite
up."
quotes from Armageddon.
Yeah, come
Steve
on.
Buscemi. You realize we're strapped to 1,000,000 pounds of rocket fuel built by the lowest bidder.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's true. It is true.
Come on,
It's how we did things.
here I am about to go to space, and I got Nurse Ratchet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But moving our conversation forward just a little bit, when we come to the docking sequence of Neil
So good.
being selected to try and dock with the space station in space, I love when they enter the rocket, and we mentioned the direction already.
Gosh.
But the director chooses to do a POV shot of when they go into the rocket, and the rocket looks awful. It looks dirty as hell.
You expect to see duct tape holding some of that crap together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a tin can.
Yeah, it just looks so nasty. It looks, and all the bolts and shit. And the funniest thing is, when they're strapping everybody down, there's two things that are really funny. His co-pilot, when they're strapping him in, one of the NASA engineers just looks at his seatbelt and goes, "There's a small problem here," and he goes, "Does anybody have like a knife or something?"
A Swiss Army knife. Yeah.
Yeah. Swiss Army knife. And the pilot is going, "Excuse me, what did you say?"
Yeah. Is a Swiss Army knife going to be good enough?
Yeah, and he's like, and he's like, no, I just got this thing here, and he takes a Swiss Army knife and he removes a piece of plastic, and I'm like, "Excuse me, sir, that's not something I want to see before I can go off in a fucking rocket."
Exactly. Well, and then, he says, "Oh, it's a piece of glue."
Yeah.
Oh, is
Extra glue.
that extra glue, or is that
Extra.
glue that should be holding my? And why are you using glue to hold my seatbelt together?
Yeah.
I got some questions.
Yeah, I got some questions.
But again, that sells, like you said, the direction of that sells the ad hoc, ham-fisted, jam it in, go attitude we had at the time. And
No, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also like the fact that when they do, secure that pilot in, and him and Neil are just sitting there, and you don't hear anything because Neil and his other pilot don't talk smartly because they're probably as nervous as hell.
I'd be wetting myself.
Yeah, but so they don't talk, but the sequence lasts for a while before they actually close them in, and you hear like the sound of jet fuel. You hear cranking. You hear creaking. I'm like, holy shit! Are these guys gonna die? Because
So cool.
before this, his friend died trying to do exactly what he's about to do.
Yep.
So I'm like, what the hell could he possibly be thinking at this point? But eventually, I'm sorry, you
Oh
want
no,
to
I'm
finish?
just excited. I'm just excited. I love this scene so much.
But eventually they get everything they have to get ready, and one of the engineers closes the lid. And as they
Hmm.
close the lid, it just goes, zoop, and all of a sudden you're like, "Holy shit! They are in a literal sardine can." And the engineer just goes like this with a thumbs up, and I'm like, "Dude,
Yeah, yeah. Bat, bat.
really?"
You're good.
Yeah, and I'm like,
It's so
"Yeah,
crazy.
I think so.
Yeah, but
Um,
I visited Kennedy. I don't know if we've had this conversation before, but my wife. So when I was youngster, my mom made sure I was up to witness the first shuttle launch ever. Columbia lifted off, and so I was up early in the morning as 4 or 5 years old to watch that, and then um, fast forward to 2011, and all of a sudden the shuttle program is over, and I just told myself my entire life, oh, you'll get to see the shuttle launch because the shuttle will always launch. Turns out that's there's an end date to that, and so my wife planned an entire trip to Florida around that shuttle launch so that I could go. And I saw Shuttle Atlantis lift off as the last shuttle, STS 135, leave from Kennedy Space Center. And it was just an incredible moment. But you know, coming to that from these kinds of moments where you're in the cockpit with this character, with this person, with these two people, you feel the closeness between them as, and you have that they're together but separate in their moment. They're both doing their whatever's in their head to get ready for this. And you are, like you said, it's the cockpit POV. You're Neil sitting in the seat. You're Dave sitting in the seat when they bring these doors down. And the way they close, there's a lot of darkness before the window.
Yeah.
And, we're talking a window
Tiny window
comes
yeah.
in. And I don't think folks realize, a couple things about why it was named Gemini is because, and I only say it that way because that's the way they say it. I say Gemini because I am a Gemini, but they say Gemini. And the point of it was there had to be two pilots or two people in the spacecraft because eventually we're getting to three. And then it was to do the rendezvous maneuver to prove that you could do rendezvous in space. So two things, right? Two things matching up. But when they close those hatches down and you just feel that crampness, when you're at Kennedy at the rocket park, they have versions of these capsules that that you're allowed to climb into. They're more like playground equipment, but they are approximate enough. And I've climbed into an Apollo capsule, which is obviously the biggest of the capsules as part of this program, and it is an incredibly limited amount of space.
Oof.
Think about they are in this capsule, in these seats, in those suits, unable to move about the cabin, as it were, for 8 days sometimes.
Oh,
And you think about how often do you use the
have to
restroom in
pee.
8 days? How often do you need to do a two in
Yeah.
8 days?
Yeah.
There aren't facilities, right?
Uh-uh.
So when we think about the fortitude that it takes to go on these missions in these conditions and decide that was fun enough, you're going to do it again. And you and I are talking about the bullshit of spending 8 hours on a flight in a plane with a bathroom, where I'm not strapped into a seat. But as you mentioned, the creakiness, all of that's going on. We are with Neil as he's looking around. He sees the bolts, all the rivets, and every time he glances at a rivet, you hear a creak, right, or a hiss, or something. And before the rocket launches, you're in there, and you can see them swaying, through the
Yeah.
window,
Mm-hmm.
and then but when the rocket lights off, and then just the whole thing is
Man.
just you're gonna I just man, as much as I've ever said I wanted to do that, do I really want to do that?
No, but I mean, you think once you get strapped in and once you hear the door close, that's the worst of it, but that's not it. The
That's
worst
just
of it,
starting.
The worst of it is when you take off because it is so fucking loud,
Mm-hmm.
and it must have sounded awful. It must have felt like they were about to break apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I was the sound design. That's another thing I wanted to point out in this film. The sound design and the sound mix of all the sounds when rockets take off. I mean, is incredible. It really, really is incredible. But now I think it's really important that we get to the star of the show. When they actually when they actually get to space and they, I'm going to skip forward a little here, but they
That's okay.
actually do dock
Mm-hmm.
with the space station, and you're thinking, oh, okay, they
Ta-da!
did some. They you're thinking, okay, ta-da, they did something, and nothing went wrong, and you're sitting going, oh, this might actually work, and then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, they're moving, they're actually moving, and they shouldn't be moving, and I'm sitting there going, oh fuck, they're gonna die,
Yep. Yep. And,
and I'm
it's an intense moment.
yeah, man. Let me ask you something. When you were watching the movie for the first time, how did you think they were gonna do the whole docking sequence with the space station? Like, did you have any preconceived notions of what you wanted to see or how it was gonna go, how it was gonna play?
No, not really. Just an aside here. I'm a huge fan of letting the story tell itself, and so I try to minimize even going into something that I know. Even if I know the story ahead of time, I try to minimize my expectation, just because I want to be told the story that they're trying to tell and let that stand on its merit. So, of course, you know, I knew the history of this mission as it's been told, but seeing that be retold, two of the things that come up are, and again to show Neil's coolness under pressure, the Agena and Gemini 8 were launched at the same time and meant to rendezvous in orbit to prove that we could do the lunar extraction bit with Apollo. And so first thing goes off awry in that mission is that they're off trajectory just a bit, and they're not sure if they're even going to be able to line up with Agena. But Neil works it out, and they find their way. And another to, I think this is the point where they're like, can you give us a status update? And he's like, no, too busy doing
No.
stuff.
Yeah.
He's just straightforward. He's like, no, I'm fucking working.
No, he's fucking working.
Yeah, take the call. And so he figures out how to line them back up. And keeping in mind, there are no things in orbit really at this time in human history. There's, Sputnik is up there somewhere, but there are no points of orientation that, no Sat-Star 1 that you could be like, okay, well, I know where that satellite is and I can turn myself. He found this speck of dust floating in the planet, both of them falling at 17,500 miles an hour, mind you, finds it and then lines it up to make the dock like you're talking about. But that is just the beginning of the adventure. Like you said, successful dock, everybody's back patting and hooping and hollering.
Nope.
Now, I don't know if it was dramatic or if it actually happened this way, but before the tragedy or before the unexpected event, they go into loss of signal, so they can't communicate to NASA what's happening while it's happening. Again, I don't know if that's part of the mission history or if that's part of the story, but it does amp up the drama because they come back into signal and just all shit's broke loose.
Yeah. I really like this scene because of two reasons. One, like we've said countless times on this video, Neil is very, very good under pressure. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other reason why I like this scene so much is because it ties into something that we've seen earlier in the film.
Mm-hmm.
It ties into Neil sitting in that contraption
Mm-hmm.
that teaches you how to deal with G's and teaches you how to deal with accelerated rates of spin. And I'm sitting there going, oh shit, he's gonna black out. Oh shit, he's gonna black out. And when he's able to get the ship back in control, it is so amazing because it cuts back to the astronaut. It cuts back to mission control saying that, oh, he's dead. We're gonna have to. there's no way that anybody could get this ship back upright.
Yep.
But I was riveted throughout the entire sequence, and I was like, oh god, he's gonna pass out. But
And it's one of
no,
those
go
things
ahead.
where, like, you know the history, you know he survives, but even still, they sell it in a way that you're worried, that you're concerned that it's not going to play out. It's kind of like how well they sold the drama in Apollo 13. You know that story turns out the way it turns out, but in the moment, you're like, you feel
Right.
the danger, you feel the pressure, and it all goes back to the cinematography.
I also think that this is the point when they turn off those squawk box. They
Mm-hmm.
turn off the
Mm-hmm.
box.
Yep.
And I love when Neil's wife realizes that the box is off, and she drives all the way to NASA, and
Was it Deke?
yeah,
I
yeah,
think. Yeah.
she gets taken, and she goes, turn the fucking box. She doesn't say turn the fucking box back up, but basically that's what she says. She says turn the fucking box back on. I can handle it. And she says something very, very prophetic. She goes, you're a bunch of boys. You don't know what the hell you're doing.
Yeah. And
And
that
I'm
is
like,
literally the truth.
yeah, and I'm like, you know what? She does have a point because so many people have died at this point. Where I mean, the biggest loss is coming. We'll get to that in a second. But the biggest loss is about to come. We'll get to that in a second. But I mean, she's right. So many people have died while they're trying to do this impossible thing, to where you wonder, is it actually worth it
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
actually get there first? Like, is our need to prove the Soviets, to beat the Soviets, so strong that is it worth all the dying that is happening and that is going to happen?
Well, and I think about it too. Okay, so Soviet propaganda aside, um, not just their practical successes in achievements up to that point, the Soviets that is, but presumably a lower loss of life overall. I think they lost a cosmonaut, maybe two, and that was on re-entry. One of the Soyuz capsules, the heat shield failed, or the control thrusters failed, or the parachute failed. And the cosmonaut smashed into the ground.
Oof.
But um, and they, we, I think, lost more life trying to get there because we were, and we still suffer this. Sorry, fellow Americans, but we suffer from an incredible sense of exceptionalism, that we're going to be able to do these things just because we're American. And we can do them better because we're American. And we win
No,
sometimes,
we
and,
can't.
and sometimes we lose. And this is one of the things where we got ourselves ahead. The tragedies could have been avoided if and including the more modern tragedies. We all know the history now, the full story of Challenger,
Oh
and
yeah,
then that was 100% murder.
preventable.
Yeah, and questionably the same with Columbia. They knew that she was going to die on reentry, and they didn't tell that crew. And I still question whether or not we didn't have other options. But that's not this podcast. The
Hmm.
point of it is, we get to that point where haven't we already paid too much? Does it become a sunk cost fallacy where we just continue to put lives up for sale to reach the moon to beat the Soviets? And are we actually better at it? Because when you go back and look at the history of the American space program, it was more skin of our teeth than it was actual success. And
Hmm.
it was 100% the steel and metal of the people they put in those seats than it was the equipment they were flying.
The other thing that I wonder is that, I mean, in the movie they go over this a little bit, but they sort of like glance over the political machinations
Yeah.
of the time, and they cut to various footage of people asking, like, I can't pay my rent, but Whitey's on the moon,
Oh, that's an
or
excellent poem. That is, I
yeah,
want to stop just a second,
sure,
um,
go ahead.
and let the audience know. Go. It's a spoken word, kind of a slam poetry thing, and it's called "Whitey on the Moon," and everyone should listen to it because it highlights to this
It's so
day
good.
the disparities between what we do as a society and what we allow to happen to our society,
Hmm.
right? And the point in this, and just real quick, the point in this poem is, I can't pay my bills, but Whitey's on the moon, right?
Mhm.
It kind of the way that just, and it happens in the background, you know, and it's one of the only kind of things in the soundtrack, let's say, that is prominent above the story itself, and it just kind of puts all of that into perspective. We're accomplishing these great things, but we're failing greatly at the same time, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's an
No,
excellent poem.
I actually, yeah. Um, when I was watching this movie, I mean, look, I'm biased. I love space, so
Me too.
I'll always say, hey, we should really do this, or we should have done that, because that shows, to me, that shows the capability of human beings and how far we can go. And if we put our minds to something, and if we have the available needs, we can do it. We can go into space. We can perhaps one day meet Klingons or Vulcans or what have you, if that
Exactly.
stuff is really out there. Um, but if I could push us forward just one more time, all right, now is a point of the show that I really dreaded talking about, because I'm like, how could this happen?
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
when we have Ed White and the two other astronauts, I'm sorry,
Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee.
I don't know I don't know them by name. I should, but I don't. I'm
That's
bad
okay.
with names.
I got you. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. That's why you're here. Um, when they're sitting in the, in the pod, and going through, their checklist, I'm sitting going, when this thing was built, like whoever built this thing, because we said these ships are built by the lowest, you know, the lowest bidder. But when these things were built, like, didn't they triple check and double check all the equipment and make sure all the wiring was correct? Because I'm like, how could this happen?
Yep.
And I'm like,
So for the historical context for the listeners, if you're not aware of the tragedy of Apollo 1, it was a on the ground test. Essentially, they call it the plugs out test, where they remove all of the cabling that connects the machine to Earth, and the simulation is to do the radios work without physical connection, right? So that's the test they're going through here, and as you said, um, doesn't someone go through and check all of these things? We shouldn't have to learn through these kinds of tragedies what it's just a cascade failure. So there was a faulty wiring was the determination of the cause. In that some Teflon insulation broke free or wasn't quite sealed properly and allowed a spark in the cabin. And these astronauts had been in this cabin, in this capsule, for hours, like hours, 8 hours or more. So they were tired. Everyone involved in the test was tired. It wasn't going well at all. Famously, Gus is quoted as saying, how are we going to talk to you from space if we can't talk between three buildings? And for whatever caused the spark, we don't know. But the major failing, two other major failings were the hatch design
the door.
required an internal push to open, and in a pressurized cabin, not going to happen. The other failing or horrible mistake was that pressurized cabin was 100% pure oxygen. And in a 100% oxygen environment, things that don't normally burn will burn. So Velcro, which was developed for the space race, doesn't burn. It was flame retardant on its own, but in a 100% pure oxygen environment, fire going to
It's gonna
fire.
burn.
And as much as I can picture myself and empathize and horrifically put myself into their position, the only thing that I can take away from that, because I mean, just they were in there for 30 seconds.
It was
Y'all
quick.
take y'all take a moment and count yourself down for 30 seconds and imagine being in a literal bomb fireball through that entire time. What they tell us is that the oxygen was depleted so quickly they asphyxiated. But I don't care, man. You're on fire, you're on fire.
Yeah.
However long, however short amount of time it takes. Yeah,
I
tragedy,
mean,
just tragedy.
yeah. I mean, based on what you just said, I mean that they were asphyxiated. I was like, I'm not too sure about that, because, but as you were talking there, I was saying at least it was quick, but I don't know if it was quick. So
Yeah. Yeah.
my hope is that it was quick.
Yeah. And you know,
Um,
the is when you have a rapid evacuation of the oxygen in the room, so you know you immediately aren't able to. You
to
can
breathe.
aspirate whatever it is, but you're not breathing oxygen.
No.
And you know, within 5 seconds of lack of oxygen, you're typically
You're
going to
dead.
pass out. But yeah, I've always been able to, unfortunately, been able to kind of empathize myself into that situation. It's absolutely terrifying, um, and when you put it into perspective, 100% preventable with a little bit of side thought instead of just rushing. We knew not to pressurize in 100% oxygen environments because we don't do that with scuba equipment.
No, we don't.
We don't use 100% oxygen in scuba equipment. It's pressurized with natural atmosphere, which doesn't catch fire. But as tests go, unfortunately, the cost was very high, but they learned a lot of lessons. They completely redesigned the Apollo module after that fire.
They fixed the damn door too.
They fixed the damn door too. Yeah, yeah, because they fixed it so that it would explode outwards. Because had they been able to evacuate the oxygen from that cabin, the fire would have died. They probably would have suffered some burns and some smoke inhalation, but
They would have been fine.
they would have been fine because you evacuate the oxygen, none of that stuff was going to burn. But yeah, that's it's the biggest black mark, maybe well, it's a terrible way to start the Apollo program. Let's put it that way.
No, but you mentioned the design of the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, why would you design a door like that needed to be open? Well, it makes sense because there are going to be people in the door.
Right.
But why wouldn't you design a door that was capable of opening in an emergency situation where the person inside the capsule, let's say they have a problem and they couldn't physically with that little crank thing
Mm-hmm.
that Ed was trying to do in the last seconds of his life. Let's
Right.
say he couldn't do that. Like, wouldn't they design a door that was able to be opened in an easier way? Why did they design the door like that? I don't
Well,
understand that.
and then sadly, that is one of the lessons that we had to learn. I think we were using like our understanding of what maybe like submarine mechanics or something like that.
Right.
Um, but hindsight being that there should have been an emergency blow hatch that just whatever because as you saw them, there were 3 layers of door. There was the internal hatch. There was the outside ablative hatch that would burn up on reentry, and then there was the capsule launch covering hatch that went over that. So there were 3 layers of door, and that there isn't just an immediate eject pull switch that explosive bolts that entire carriage out of there. There would have been 3 seconds and boom, everybody out.
Yeah.
Because the service crew was away from the gantry at that point. There would have been no danger in them, and I'm sure it's easier to recover from a door to the face than it is to a fire. So, but yeah, hard lessons learned, and I still there's still a memoriam at that launch pad for those three astronauts.
Oh, that's great. That's really wonderful. But the scene that really, there's a couple scenes coming up that we're going to discuss here in a minute. But the scene that really gets me is when Neil is at, I think he's at a party, or I think he's at the White
He's at the
House.
White House. Yeah.
He's at the White House,
Yeah.
and he gets the call, and he has a glass in his hand,
Mm-hmm.
and as he's being told the news, he obviously, like Neil does, he doesn't really react, but all of a sudden you hear, and you look at the glass in his hand, and he broke the glass in his hand.
He's cut his
And he-
hand with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he had to actually wrap it up while him and the other astronauts, a couple hours later, were listening to the report on the news. And that brings us to a scene that you mentioned early on, or off the call. I can't remember when you mentioned it. But we see the wife of Ed White, standing outside of her house in the driveway, with open the back of her car
yeah,
open,
trunk of her car
the
open,
trunk
yeah.
open, and just standing there. And the brilliant thing that the director does in this scene is that he shows Ed's son looking at his mom throughout the through the window of the house,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really, really terrifying. And I did some research on his wife, and unfortunately, his wife really couldn't live without him, and she actually killed herself
Oh, that's unfortunate.
a couple years later,
Yeah.
which is really really sad.
Again, the uncounted cost of
Yeah,
what it
of
took to get
flying
us
in
to the moon.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, of
Well,
flying in
and
space.
another thing that I took away from that particular scene is, we have Neil's wife coming to see this. Obviously, she's framing it in the perspective of her husband's future as an astronaut as well. But what they show is, Ed's wife there just pondering what to, basically that feeling of what do I do now, right?
Hmm.
And then they show like the neighbor basically just like, I don't see this, right?
Yeah.
And then but Neil's wife comes over to kind of help her move to the next step, kind of, remind her that there are things that you still need to do.
Hmm.
But it showed, I think, a disconnect. Like other astronauts' wives would separate themselves from those who had lost their husbands, maybe as a superstition, right? To I don't want to take on that bad energy and compromise my husband. And just kind of that sense of isolation was very well sold, I think, through just that quick narrative.
But you know what? You shouldn't do that
Yeah,
because I think I think especially for people in the service or astronauts or police officers, I think it's very important to support your fellow family members or your fellow individuals who have lost somebody in the line or in the line of
exactly,
duty.
exactly,
Um, because because the feeling that they have is only a feeling that you can relate with because you're in the shit too.
exactly, exactly.
So for them to do that, I don't know if Neil's wife did that, but which she doesn't seem like a person that would do that. But I don't know if she did or not. But that would be very very harmful to me if I was ever in that situation, and all my friends, specifically the ones that I lived with and I woke up with and I saw every day, just left me because my spouse died trying to do something that
Right,
was nigh impossible. But
exactly.
that really brings us to the thrust of the film. I mean, the death of those three astronauts really makes Neil go nuts,
Hmm.
and he really starts going, okay, we need to do this now because we don't know how much longer they're going to allow this program to go forward. Because after that happens, Congress is really chomping at the bit to like, we need to stop doing this because it's not really worth it anymore. And that really brings us to the scene that I really love and is a really highlight of the film for me when Neil, after almost dying,
Right.
is walking someplace, and then somebody asks him, should we really stop doing this? Is the cost too high? And Neil just really, sort of sarcastically says, haven't we already lost enough?
Yeah.
Like, the the cost is already fucking high.
Yep.
So we need to do this right to make sure that when we go up in space, this doesn't happen, right?
Yep.
So we need to get this right down here so we don't fuck up when we're up there.
Exactly.
But I love the fact that he said to this individual, the cost is already too fucking high. We've already lost way too many people.
Yep.
So for us to stop now would be ridiculous because
Exactly.
we've already lost everything. There's nothing that could happen to us now that hasn't happened to us already. So what did you think of that scene in particular when Neil just sort of laid it out there for the individual that he was speaking to?
I thought it was perfect because it is the correct answer at that point, especially. You know, what at that cost already. Even if it were just the three Apollo astronauts and not counting the other test pilots and the people who were lost off the pad or off the spacecraft, um, at that point, you would dishonor them to not continue. They would have literally died for no good reason. And you can argue, is going to the moon a good reason to die? And I think that any one of those astronauts would have told you absolutely it's a good reason to die just for having tried. um, let's not discount their agency. These folks knew what they signed up for, to a degree. They knew that every day going to work was a chance that they wouldn't come home from that job. um, and so to discount their agency to take away Gus and Ed and Roger's agency of having chose to be on that pad to do that work. You know, I won't speak for the dead. I can't speak for the dead, but if I understand anyone who's been in the military or anyone who has that mindset, they would have rather died themselves than for the people behind them to have died, not having learned the lesson. Who's to say had that plugs out test gone smoothly? When was that capsule gonna catch fire? Right, because it was just obviously a matter of time. And so, did they prevent a larger tragedy by having suffered themselves? We'll never know. But I would bet, I would put some good money on them still saying I would climb that rocket and go through that so that no one else had to.
Mhm.
I just kind of feel like those are the kind of people they were.
Yeah, no. The other question that it begs is if Ed and those other astronauts survived that test that they were going through, would Neil be the one to land first, or would it have been Ed White?
Right, because it totally changed changed the
The
pilot
order.
rotation.
Hmm.
And history does history pay off as well as a narrative does? I don't know, but we see again, Neil sticking it out to the last minute on that lunar lander trainer
He
played
almost
right up to
fried
the
himself.
actual moment. Let's be honest. They were 30 seconds away from having no fuel when he set down Eagle. Um, some odd miles away from where it was supposed to.
Yeah.
Real quick recommendation for anyone who is interested. The BBC a few years ago did 2 seasons of an excellent podcast called 13 Minutes to the Moon. And it is actual accounting of leading up to the moon landing. And the 13 minutes comes from the undocking of Eagle to the landing on the moon. It took 13 minutes for Neil to do that. But the fact that, he understood the controls of that machine from having flown a shit version of it, that he was able to fly, literally had to fly the machine and land it on purpose. Um, and I love in For All Mankind, spoiler alert for that show, one,
Yeah.
two, three. I love how they play that moment in the alternate history. That it was still
It's
literally
still
fly by the seat, but they
it was
ended
still
up
shit.
akimbo, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Still
but
shit.
but if he hadn't have if he hadn't insisted and stuck it out through that trainer, would we have managed that landing?
Look. I believe that Neil. I believe that the universe knew that they wanted Neil to be on that ship, and Neil was going to be the one that was going to do this for
Some
us.
people are destined for greatness, and sadly it's not us.
No, it's not us, unfortunately. But you know what?
We have
But
our
you
own
know,
level
but
of greatness.
but you know what, Dan? At least we're here for the masses, entertaining the masses right now.
Exactly.
But I would just like to move on and talk to a little bit about the overall selection process of after that tragedy occurred, when the order was all fucked up. I think that those at NASA really had no other choice. I really think that they didn't have any other options, because they weren't going to make that pain in the ass Buzz the commander of the commander of the mission. So, do you think that they had other choices other than Neil, or do you think that they were looking at somebody else?
Well, I don't know if oh why can't I remember his name? Not Alan Shepard, Ed, not
Uh,
John Glenn.
no,
Don't
John
know if
Glenn.
John
Yeah.
Glenn was still a astronaut at the time. He would probably be the next most wholesome
Choice.
face. That's where Neil, he was the whole package. He was the good all around American person.
And he was a test pilot
He
too.
was a test pilot. He was cool as a cucumber. He came across, and he was
Cold.
civilian. He was civilian, and I think that plays a lot into it.
Really?
Um, that having I think it's important that it was a civilian who was the first person to step on the moon, not
Uh huh.
affiliated with the military in any way. Just a part of the program, and to Buzz being a part of that crew. Buzz Aldrin, I don't know if he is really as acerbic as they
I
played him
don't
to
know.
be. I will always and forever consider the man an American hero for punching that idiot in the face for calling the moon
Ah,
landing fake. That's one of my favorite clips. You
that was a
know,
great video, by the
it's a
way.
great video. Go check that out if you haven't. Buzz Aldrin punches an idiot in the face live on camera. It's
Great.
so good. Um, but if you don't know about Buzz, the man invented orbital mechanics. So he
Yep.
literally worked out the math that sent himself to the moon and brought himself home. So
Yep.
there's something there, and I think a lot of people forget that it is actually Doctor Buzz Aldrin
Mm-hmm.
that he's addressed. But he wasn't. If he was the person or similar to the person they portrayed his caricature, he wouldn't have been a good face for the moon landing.
No, I mean, we've said it multiple times in this sort of discussion. We've said that, but I mean, um, oh my God, Neil Armstrong, Neil is very, very composed, very,
Yeah,
very cold, and very, very calculated, and Buzz is very, very loud, very, very garish, and very, very like, ugh. He's just
yeah.
like, he's not the guy that
He
you want.
says what he's thinking, and as Neil
Yeah,
points out, maybe you shouldn't.
yeah. Yeah, so that brings us to something that you hinted at early on in the discussion, and I'm so glad that we're actually here now to actually where we can talk about it. But when Neil finds out that he's going to be the one that goes to the moon, he comes home and he tells his wife, and he says, "Well, guess what? I'm going to go to the moon." And his wife is happy for him. His wife is happy, but she does say this. She says, "Okay, you're gonna go to the moon, but you need to do me. You need to do this first. You need to sit down, both of the boys, and you need to tell them that there's a possibility that you aren't gonna come back, because
Exactly.
I am not fucking doing this. I have had it. I am not fucking doing this. You need to do this." And I love how Neil tries to, because when his wife is speaking to him, he's packing up and he's fucking, you
He's
know,
busy working himself. Oh, I'm packing.
yeah,
That's what he's told himself,
yeah.
and that's what he tells her. I'm packing. I don't have time. And she's like, "Do
No,
you want to?
the
Do you want your kids to remember the last time they spent with you? You packing?"
Yeah, no, but I think I think that Neil kind of really doesn't want to deal with this. Kind of doesn't want to have this conversation, because I think he thinks if he has this conversation, I think there might be something in the back of his mind that goes, "Oh shit! If I have this conversation, I might not really come back."
I'm speaking it into existence, right?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I really like the fact that his wife says, "No, Neil, you need to fucking pay attention to me, and you need to sit your kids down and tell them the danger of this mission. Tell them that there isn't a possibility that there is a strong possibility that you might not come back, and you need to tell them that you love them,
Yep.
because that is very, very important." And I love how during the conversation, the kid who plays Neil's oldest son, he's just sitting there with a very stoic face, just like his father. He's sitting there and he goes, and Neil is explaining how it's going to go and this and that. But he goes, at one point, when Neil's explaining something, his son goes, so let me get this right. There's a slight possibility that you might not come back.
Yeah.
And Neil goes, that's a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
And
all it takes. That honesty. You know.
yeah. And I love how one of his youngest son gives him a hug
Yeah.
before he goes off to bed. But his oldest son, the one who asked him the question, he just says, he just shakes his hand and he's like, Neil's like, "Okay,
Yep.
okay, I can go now."
Yep.
But what did you think about that scene where Neil was like, "I don't want to deal with this," and his wife is like, "No, you need to do it"? What did you think about that whole sequence? Because I really, really enjoyed that. I thought it was very, very well done.
It's relatable. I think that is a way in the story that they have humanized the character of Neil Armstrong, because it's easy to consider, the man, the myth, the legend. But what about the human? And it's a way for them to express his anxiety, um, he's trying to avoid the things he can't control by controlling the things he can. It's as someone with ADHD and autism, I tend to have to sort things into places where I can control them. Like, the routines are steps along the way in a day of chaos that I have an ability to manage. And that's, I think, he's distracting himself. It's something that we can all relate to. If I ignore it, it goes away. If I pretend to be doing something else important, she can't ask me to do something other. And she's like, nope, nope. This packing is bullshit. Okay, we're not doing bullshit right now. We need to go talk to the kids. Actually, you need to go talk to the kids. I'm gonna stand in the kitchen and have a cigarette, and you're gonna do what needs to be done. And to the point of the older son, kind of absorbing the moment. Uh, you know, one of the ideologies is always, man of the house. If dad's not there, then the oldest son becomes man of the house, whatever that means. But that's kind of in that transitional phase. He accepts his role in the eventuality that dad doesn't come home, and that's where the handshake comes from. It's an upgrade. Although I will only ever and always hug my kids. Handshake with your children is too formal.
No, that's ridiculous.
But give them the style of the time. That's pretty straightforward. But I dig it. I dig it.
Yeah, you hug those little monsters
all the time, every day.
Yeah. No, I mean they're your children, and it's very important. I mean, if I ever become a father, it's going to be very important to me to make sure that my kids know that I love them from the earth to the moon.
Yep.
To use the reference.
Literally. Yep.
But now we get to the point of the movie that we've all wanted to see. We get to the launching, and we get to the lead up to the launching. So here's where I have a little bit of a problem. They leave very, very early. They leave like at the crack of dawn. It must be like
4 a.m. or something. Yeah,
4 a.m.
it's
or
early.
4:30. And I'm like, why the fuck would you leave that early? I'm like, is there a point to leaving that early? So, do you know like the reasoning why they selected to leave that early?
It's hours out from the projected launch window, and so as far as I know,
but they had to get there.
Oh,
no,
balls early in the morning. Yeah. Well, it's, they want to, they're quarantined for a certain amount of time just to make sure they're not developing any illness or anything like that. And then, they've got to get suited. It takes so much time and assistance to put on the spacesuit.
Those things
itself.
are heavy, man.
Right. They're like 45 pounds. They got to get strapped into the couches. They have to go through all of the tests and everything. So again, these guys are going to sit on the pad for probably 4 hours before anything starts to happen that isn't just them sitting there. And having been through a launch, a live launch, there are several intentional holds built into the countdown where, okay, we've gotten to 10 minutes out, we're going to stop the clock. These are the things we check. All those things check out, we start the clock back again. So, preparing that launch, getting ready to send them up, there's just so many hours worth of it's like literally packing as you're getting on the ship. You have to, there's so many things to take care of. And I'm sure at this point they had miles and miles of checklists after all the tests and stuff they've sorted out. But yeah, getting to work that early just to have to wait to get to work.
Yeah.
No,
you mentioned that there was tons of crap that they had to checklist, getting in the suits, making sure everything was all sorted. But I found it very strange that they gave them breakfast before they go up in the. But as you said, when they get there and from when they actually take off, it's hours before, so they would be fine.
Yeah, well, and the thing too being, we don't function well hungry.
No, we don't.
You're definitely going to make more mistakes if you're hungry and tired than, if you're well fed. I don't know what I would choose to eat because I wouldn't want to see that in my space helmet on the way up. And that would, I don't know what the possibility of that is, but you would expect if they ate breakfast early enough before the launch, they would have time to at least digest it down to a point where they might not have it back. But Yeah, I think by the time we as the public see a launch, we're right there, last 10 minutes of the countdown, so on and so forth. But there have been hours of work leading up to that launch on that day, with the crew already seated. So, yeah, I think it's, get your bathroom breaks, kids, before because once the doors close, we're not getting out of the car.
Nope. No, but the other thing that I found interesting, or at least how the movie depicts it, you see Buzz, you see Neil, and you see the other gentleman who
Michael
helped
Collins.
me. I'm sorry,
Michael Collins.
Michael Collins. Thank you.
Mhm.
The Forgotten Man, because everybody remembers Neil, and everybody
Yep,
remembers Buzz, but everybody forgets Michael Collins.
that's right.
You
The
see,
lone
you
the
see
lone cowboy.
Yeah, the lone cowboy. So you see them all sitting there eating breakfast, and like nobody's talking, nobody's saying anything. And there's this guy who's sitting with them and he's sketching them. And I'm
Hmm.
like, didn't you people have cameras at the time? I'm like, why don't but then I'm sitting there thinking that, but then I'm like, that would be really distracting. And that
It
would
would be
really
really
be
distracting. Yeah.
that would piss a lot of, I mean, that would piss me off.
Well,
But
and I think too, like the sketching it kind of makes it maybe more tangible,
mhm,
right? As a record, tangible record of the moment,
mhm,
that it be sketched. And of course, there could have been rules about cameras versus top secret, Soviet leaks, things like that.
right.
My
No, but
cynical
once
self,
Yes, of course. Somebody has to be cynical during this review,
of course.
or this discussion. But once they start moving, and once they actually go and get to the famous vehicle, and once they get to the physical launch pad, there you see cameras, and there you see some press. But did
Exactly.
you know? Did you know that in the movie they actually used the same vehicle that actually took the
Oh wow,
real astronauts to the pad?
that's awesome.
They
That's
actually
awesome.
used the same vehicle. That was really, really cool. But here we are. So the three astronauts come out, and this is actually another interesting directing choice that the director of the film uses. We actually see them take the elevator and go up, and we just sort of just are with them as they go up and they go up and they go up, and you're looking at the size of this thing, and you're like thinking, these guys must be thinking if something goes wrong, I ain't coming. There in no way that I'm getting the fuck down from this rocket.
Nope.
So I'm like, what do you think must have been going through these guys' minds as they were going up there? Because I'm like, what could they possibly be thinking right now?
I've tried so many times throughout my life to kind of put myself in those moon boots,
I
as
have
it
no
were,
idea.
because I just I think you are required to be able to separate yourself from the moment in a way that I'm not sure I could do.
Hmm.
As anticipatory as I get going on a roller coaster, you know, I can
Yeah.
imagine being strapped to a rocket, several feet above several hundred feet above the ground, with presumably a launch avoidance system that could save my life if it had to. But that's never been tested. Because yeah, like you said, once you're on top of it, you're 35 stories into the air. You're not getting down in any quick fashion. Let alone
No.
if something goes wrong, that's it. It's over.
You did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Several million pounds of rocket fuel, oxygen and hydrogen, just waiting to blow up.
Hmm. Actually, this is actually the point where after the rocket takes off, one of my favorite shots in the entire film is when the director chooses to show the outside of the rocket. Again, it's the first time in the film that he's done this, but you see a shot of the rocket slowly taking off, and you're looking at the clouds, and you're like staring, and you're thinking, "What the hell is the director drunk?" You just see the clouds, but all of a sudden, you see the rocket come through the clouds, and it is the most beautiful, majestic shot that I've seen in a movie in quite some time, and it was just amazing. Also, the force of the rocket taking off from the ground is it's like a nuclear explosion.
Hmm.
It goes boom, and like, if you watch the film in 4K and with Dolby Digital and with these headphones, it sounded like a goddamn rock concert in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like,
Well,
it was.
having seen an actual, large launch, there are a couple of things that don't sell well in any of the videos or any of the accounts, and that is they always seem to show it in some kind of a slow motion. It literally goes up like a rocket. It goes off faster than you anticipate because you are used to seeing these replayed, slowed down, momentous versions of a rocket launch. When the shuttle, it was up in the air before you could think that it was launched, and then but you say that explosion when it takes off, you don't hear it straight away. What you do have happen is you see the shockwave, and I was 3 miles away. I was as close as a civilian would be allowed without special access. 3 miles away from the launch pad on the causeway. After Atlantis has cleared the tower, you see the shockwave coming to you, and I felt it hit me in the chest.
Oh my god!
Okay, and that is just it is something that unless you have just it's the only other way that you can experience that impact would be on the rocket itself. And so just the absolute raw power that gets pushed out, and just to see that coming at you. And I mean, when I realized, I was just like, okay, I'm just going to stand here and absorb this.
No, you ain't.
And then, but like you mentioned, that shot coming through the clouds.
So beautiful.
That was the shot of Atlantis too. She did that. She went through and came behind the clouds, and then right before it would have been out of sight, she broke above the cloud, and then that was it. That was the last time I saw that bird. Wow. But it happens and it's over way too fast. Just like anything great in life, by the time you are able to kind of reconcile what just happened, it's done.
It's over.
It's over, like good movies.
Yeah. The other thing that I found very, very interesting is that when the astronauts were in space and they were going already, Buzz, our good pal of the film, he's a good pal. Come on, he's a dick.
He's a good pal. He's the guy you want around.
Yeah. Yeah. He is the perfect drinking buddy that you want.
Exactly.
So when they're up there on the way to the moon, Buzz asks, "Hey, did you bring something?" The other guy says no. Yeah. He asks he goes, "Did you bring any tapes, anything?" And the forgotten man, the cowboy, says, "No, I didn't bring anything."
Yeah.
Neil says, "Yeah, I didn't bring any food. I didn't bring any magazine, but I did bring this." And he just throws over this thing to Buzz, and Buzz plays it, and it's the most creepy ass piece of music that you've ever heard before. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is this? But then I remembered that piece of music is the piece of music that Neil and his wife danced to at their wedding. So I was like, that's interesting, because you do hear it early on in the film.
Yeah.
Because there's this sequence early on where he's had a bad day, and he's at home and he's like flipping through their records, because at the time they had records.
Yeah.
LPs. He's flipping through their LPs. He's flipping through the LPs, and he picks up one and he puts it on the record player. And his wife goes, "Oh, I'm surprised you remembered this," and they just start dancing. Right? I don't know if you remember.
I don't. That's a great point to call out, though.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very short scene, but it also shows you how much they love each other and how much they respect each other. But so Buzz puts this thing in, and he goes, "This is what you selected to bring to the boom? This is what you selected?" And then the cowboy,
in true Buzz Dick fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. And and then the cowboy, then the cowboy puts it on the 1MC, so NASA can hear it.
Yeah.
And and then I'm just imagining NASA sitting down, going, "What the hell is this?
What are we hearing?"
Yeah, what are we hearing? But when we eventually get to the space station, as the astronauts are making their final check-ins, as the astronauts are making their final, as they go into the final checklist before they go into the limb, the cowboy asks, "So, you want this? You want some gum? What do you want this? Do you want?" But Buzz is like, "No." Neil's like, "No, I don't need that." So they basically went to the limb with nothing.
Yep. What aside from what was already on there, they had the limb was packed with its own provisions, et cetera, and so on. But
Yeah,
yeah, they didn't
yeah.
take
They
hardly
didn't take
anything else.
anything.
Yeah.
They didn't take anything. So at the point when the limb detaches from the spaceship, are you thinking, are they gonna do it, or are you sitting there going, "Oh fuck, something's gonna happen"?
I,
As a person who knows what happened, are you still thinking, "Oh fuck, something might go wrong"?
Yeah, always, and again, that is one of the things. I am a very willing suspender of my disbelief. So
Of course, you
I
like
can,
Star Trek. You
I
have to
love
be.
exactly. I love to forget that I know what's going to happen, right? Because I want to. In a tragic story, I want to believe in a different outcome. In this kind of story, I want to feel the suspense. So I allow myself to still accept the potential of failure. When they're going through the landing and you're running low on fuel, knowing they land is secondary to the fact that, oh my God, we're running out of fuel. Because I want that excitement. I as an audience member, as someone who's enjoying this story, I want that. And it doesn't matter, for instance, how many times I've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Every time I reread it, I get something new out of it. The joke, a different joke is funny in a different way, or something like that. So knowing the outcome doesn't diminish the story for me, and I'm able to I want to be in that moment with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's storytelling, that's directing, that's acting. All of those things allow you to absorb yourself into, even if you know an outcome. I think.
We've talked about so many things during this discussion, but I just want to highlight one thing that we haven't touched on yet. The music in this film by the composer, I think, really heightens the. Okay, good. The suspense. Somebody was calling me. I'll get to them later. The music in this film really heightens the suspense of what is happening on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite piece of music is the piece of music that the composer chooses to put over Neil and Buzz trying to land on the moon. It's like this percussive dun 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 dun. It is so cool. I mean, and then the whole sequence of them being just over the moon, and Neil going, 5 seconds to bingo or 3 seconds to bingo, and then as the computer, because the lunar lander computer was taking in too much information, it just went nuts.
Yep.
And that was the reason for the red light. But the sound of the red light, the music, Buzz going, we can't land there because there's rocks down there that are as big as cars, and if we land there, we're not going to be able to get it.
Exactly.
We're not going to be able to get, off, right? But the whole sequence of Neil and Buzz just trying to land this goddamn lander is so
Bucket.
yeah, bucket or whatever bucket, tin can, is so suspenseful. And the brilliant thing is that you don't see outside of the lander at all.
Yeah.
It's
all in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all in that window, and all you see is Buzz, Neil, and the inside of the lander. And I love the shot when Neil gets it under control, and the director actually does something very interesting. He focuses in on one of the lunar lander's struts,
Mm-hmm.
and all you see is this little thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as they land, it gets darker, 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 darker until it hits, and you're like, "Holy fuck! Did they do it?" And then you hear nothing for a second, and then Neil just says, "We're down."
Yep.
And he goes, "You." And I'm like, "Guy, you realize what you did? You landed on the moon."
Yep.
And all you're saying is, "We're down?"
And it calls back to the rocket plane. I'm down.
What you said before, I'm down.
Yeah, I'm down.
But and the other thing that I love, which is a very, very good point of accuracy from the director's standpoint, when they get suited up, and they're about to open the hatch, once they open the hatch, the director does something very, very cool. He sort of backs up the camera, and you hear nothing.
Yeah.
And the first time I saw the movie, I'm sitting there going, okay, we're on the moon, and I'm excited to get off to get out of the lander to see what the moon looks like. But when he opened up the hatch for a second, I was like, did my TV frizz
cut
out?
out. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Because I didn't hear anything. And then, for a couple seconds, I was sitting going, wait a second. There's no sound in space. I'm like, once I realized what the director was doing, I was like, holy fuck, that is the most genius thing ever. Because I remember reading reports of people who went to go see this movie and people who complained to the theater at this point. Like they were watching the movie and the door to the limb opens and you hear nothing for like, what, 6 minutes or 7 minutes. And there were people who left the theater and complained to the projectionist going, the sound went out. And the projectionist had to tell them, no, it didn't.
It's part of the sound design, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things you've brought up a few times. And it's easy in modern filmmaking, I think, to overplay sound effects, to overplay music. You mentioned the score, but it is just an underlayer of the film. The score is there when it's needed. It's not when it's not. But we focus more on the real world, practical crunch. The rattle, the boom, the physicality of these
crickets.
That we're in. These creaks and cracks and shifts and rattles and moans and groans of the spacecraft. And the breathing of the people and the work they're having to do. That's what we get through the sound design, not the bombastic flair of the score or overblown, blaring alarms, and everything is just, it's visceral in a way that this movie, a lot of modern movies aren't, and especially biopics tend to, I think, over dramatize a lot of the human elements, where this is just really well balanced in the acting, in the directing, in the framing, and in the sound design in a way that it just makes for a great film.
When you saw the whole sequence of them going into the lunar lander and going to the moon, and the whole sequence of Neil trying to land the goddamn tin can, what was going through your head as you saw it? I was like,
I've seen this moment portrayed practically and portrayed through cinema so much that, like, it's and imagining it through the podcast, like 13 Minutes to the Moon. The only thing that comes across to me every time, regardless of portrayal, regardless of whether or not it's real or pretend, is just the collectedness that they had to stick it to the end. I think that either spoken or otherwise, these two men had a contract to do it or die. They were committed to either we're going to land it or we will die trying. And that I think that's what they had told themselves. We are going to do it. They probably didn't mention that we're going to die trying. They probably just said we're going to do it. And you hear that in their voice. He's like, Neil's counting off, or Buzz is counting off the metrics, the fuel, the distance to the ground. Neil is just being very practical in the moment, and they're dealing with that 1202 alarm, which turns out, like you said, the computer was just literally crashing. It was dealing with too much. Well, it wasn't a disaster error. It was causing the Apollo guidance computer to overwhelm itself. That is a whole other podcast. We could do an entire podcast about the Apollo guidance computer. That's not for here, because that is a fascinating story. But the fact that they just, again, level-headed, cool cucumbers through the whole thing, got that bird down, Eagle landed, man walked on the moon, Bob's your uncle. It's like we did it a million times,
Yeah. I for one, look, I grew up loving Star Trek, and one of my favorite astronaut movies of all time, as a matter of fact, it's my favorite astronaut movie of all time, is Apollo 13, right?
It's great. It's a great movie.
And ever since I saw that movie as a kid, I'm like, I always thought to myself, why the hell didn't they do a movie about the first moon landing? Because I had never seen a dramatic interpretation of that ever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So when this movie got announced by being done by one of my favorite directors, I was like, oh my God, they're actually going to make my dream come true. I'm gonna be able to see the actual land. Well, not the actual, but I'm going to be able to see an interpretation of the first moon landing. It's so cool, and I was sitting there going, why hasn't Hollywood done this before? But
Right.
clearly, I wasn't looking in the right places, because the other space movie that I've heard about that I've never seen, which we will correct shortly, is The Right Stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
so it's Apollo 13, The Right Stuff, and there's Armageddon, but Armageddon is fluff
Fantasy.
and fun.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's fluff and fun. But there aren't that many space movies when you think about it.
Not really.
There aren't really actual movies about astronauts going into space if it's not to save the Earth from an asteroid
Right.
or to drill into the Earth to restart it. A big shout out to one of my favorite other fun, bombastic science fiction movies, The Core.
It's so good. The Core is so good that nobody gives it credit.
I love the
It's
Core.
a great, terrible movie.
I love The Core. I will fight you if you tell me The Core sucks, because it doesn't suck.
It has Delroy Lindo and Stanley Tucci and so many
Come
other people,
on.
and it's okay. So like, I just watched Free Guy. It's just big stupid fun. It's a big stupid fun movie that is this bombastic, outlandish premise. We're gonna drive a giant cigar into the middle of the earth, launch some atomic bombs, and scoot our booty out of there, and everything's gonna be fine. It's
restart it,
fine.
yeah.
It's fine. It's fine.
fine.
It's good stuff. It's good
No,
stuff.
I mean, you got Captain Pike in there. You got Harvey Dent in there before he was
Exactly.
Harvey Dent, way before that.
Yep.
But I just think it's I mean, not to get sidetracked. We're gonna get back on First Man here in a minute, but I think it's just a really, really good science fiction film. And I remember having to watch it after learning about the core and the mantle in science class. So my teacher did like this big. She did like this week of telling us about what is actually in the center of our planet, and as a reward, at the end of the week, she showed us the core.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was like, this is awesome. So ever since that day, the core has been one of my favorite films.
That's
So,
fantastic. I was actually working in cinema when the core came out, so I saw it.
That's awesome.
I got to present it. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
But back to First Man for just a couple more seconds here, because we are running kind of long. Yeah, we are way long at this point. Doesn't matter, because I love this conversation, so doesn't matter. When Buzz and Neil finally get out, and you see Neil step on the moon for the first time and say those famous lines. I mean, that was great too. It was just like, oh, thank God.
They made
After
it. Yeah.
after everything that these people went through, and after everything Neil personally went through, from the loss of his daughter to the loss of Ed to the loss of other astronauts trying to do this one goal. I mean, thank God.
It had to be some kind of a sense of relief for him, that at that moment, at least, everything leading up to that had been worth it, right?
Yeah.
To set that first foot down, and the story of loss in his life kind of gives more weight to that one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And he wasn't just stepping off of that ladder for himself.
He was for everybody.
He carried those his loved ones in his heart, and the rest of us on his shoulders. An impressive accomplishment for humanity, but for one man to bear that burden into eternity,
Yeah.
no one else will be the first person to walk on the moon ever.
Nope. It's him.
Yep.
But the other interesting thing that I found is, after he took those famous first steps, and after he said the line, you see him kind of just walking on the moon, right? Kind of just walking very slowly. But in the background, you see our good pal Buzz, and he's having the time of his life back there.
Bouncing around,
Oh,
jumping
and I'm like,
off, yeah.
Yeah,
it's
having
literally
so
Garfield
much-
and Odie,
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's having so much fun, but there you see Neil in the front, sort of just walking and walking, surveying and looking. And then he comes to this big giant crater. And then the moment of the movie makes me wonder, like, I couldn't find any information about this to see if it was real or not.
Mm-hmm.
But earlier on in the film, we see that when he loses his daughter, he takes his daughter's bracelet and he puts it into his desk.
Mm-hmm.
So he's there standing in front of the giant crater, and then he takes out something from a pocket, and it's his daughter's bracelet. And he just looks at it for a second, and he tosses it into the crater.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, if that was real, I'm like, oh, what a great guy. But if that was made up for the movie, I'm like, oh, that's a great scene as well.
Yep.
Cause, like, the biggest loss I think in this movie, regardless of whether you have respect for the astronauts who died or not, which you do, but the biggest loss I feel in this movie is the loss of Neil's daughter.
Right.
I think that really affected him and really stayed with him for the rest of his life.
Right.
And for him to sort of bring his daughter with him and to sort of give her a final resting place that isn't on Earth,
Yep.
that nobody will ever. Well, that's not true. Other people will come before that, after that, but that a place that really nobody can get to. It was really nice. What did you think of about that specific moment of him bringing the bracelet to the moon and then doing what he does with it?
Well, I think it's very in contrast to a real thing that we know happened, in that Buzz Aldrin snuck communion for himself onto the moon trip.
Oh.
If you didn't know that,
Whoa.
the first thing he did when he landed on the moon was took out a little set of communion, and he took communion on the moon. So that's Buzz for you.
Yeah.
But and that is that. Not that that's a self-serving moment, right? It serves its purpose for Buzz, but in Neil's place, he was serving his daughter's memory, and if that allowed him to bring closure, I mean, think about that. How much easier is it to look up at the moon each night and remember that you left that for your daughter than it is to go visit that grave, right? Anywhere Neil, if it's true, anywhere Neil was the rest of his life in the world, he could look up there and he could have that moment, and that's something that the rest of us will never have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he deserved, if it were true, he deserved to give himself that moment, I think.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just say that's part of the cost of getting there in a way.
No, I tried to do research, but I couldn't find anything about Neil doing something like that when he got on. I couldn't find anything.
Well, he wouldn't have told anyone.
No,
that's
of course
for sure.
not.
Yeah.
No, of course not. Now there is just one more scene that I would like to call attention to, and then we can begin to wrap up. When Neil and Buzz are in quarantine in the rooms,
Mm-hmm.
you see like the letters come in and the reaction from the entire planet, and you see their face on Time magazine and shit like that.
Right.
And to them, I think coming back to Earth would have been a very odd experience after doing something like that. And I'm wondering how would it have felt to them to be able to do that and then to come back down to Earth and have to be like everybody else again.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I don't know. Well, Neil never flew as an astronaut ever again.
no.
That was his last flight, and probably because he was the first man on the moon meant that he could never go back. Because then he becomes more than Neil Armstrong. He becomes a treasure to humanity.
Right.
Now I don't know if Michael or Buzz ever flew again either, but yeah, their lives are irreparably changed, better or worse. They are the Apollo 11 crew, and as time proved, Neil, not necessarily a recluse. He came and did as was requested from time to time, but he kept to himself. He didn't play up his fame. Not that the others have either, but obviously Buzz has been the most visible of all of them since.
Yeah.
And I can't recall if I think Michael Collins passed recently. But let me see if I can pull something up here real quick. Oh, did we meet Michael in the? Yeah, there he is. Let's see, Mike Collins. Passed away, 2021, last year. Okay.
Oh,
So almost a year ago yet. He was 90, so good on him.
I am forgetting there.
Yeah, exactly. But they they just became history's people rather than ours. You know.
No, it's interesting. I'll just mention that one scene that I have left to talk about, and then I want to ask you one more question about this whole thing.
Of course.
Um, there's a scene where Neil is in quarantine, and he's behind glass, right? And his wife shows up there to go get him, obviously, because supposedly he's been in quarantine for a
Like
month.
2 weeks, I think, or something like
2 weeks.
that. Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 weeks. Supposedly he's been in quarantine for 2 weeks, and just the emotion between Ryan Gosling and Kira Foy.
Mm-hmm.
I can never say her name right. Kira Foy.
She was great, by the way.
She was phenomenal, but just the way that they played the scene of they said so much without saying anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a very interesting place to end the movie on, because I would have liked just a tiny bit more, but in retrospect, I thought that was the right place to end the movie on,
Yeah.
because it began with the two of them
Yep.
and it ended with the two of them.
Yep.
So in a way, it was like this perfect circle moment.
Yep.
That I really appreciated. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that you mentioned that you don't think Buzz ever went up again or Neil ever went up again. What did these people do for money after like landing on the moon? Like, do you think that they just did speaking engagements?
I know that they probably did a few of those, but good. That is an excellent question because I
Like,
never
how did
really
these people-
considered. I would hope that we maybe paid them to be just themselves for the
They
rest of their
better-
life.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I have no idea what they did until.
C-
That's a great
'cause-
question.
No, because I mean, if I land on the moon, I'm like, excuse me, guys, I did something that nobody's ever done before. The government deserves to pay me for the rest of my life.
It looks like he continued to work with NASA. Neil did, including being on the Apollo 13 commission and the Challenger
okay.
commission, and yeah.
So he continued to work with NASA.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And,
cool. That's
maybe
awesome.
looks like he went to the North Pole too.
Oh, cool. Well,
Yeah,
that's not as cool
okay.
as the Earth. Moon,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I
okay.
mean, North Pole, the moon, whatever.
Moon, the moon, whatever. Well, yeah. I would take the moon over the North Pole anytime.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, I know, but I've always wondered that, like, after you do the impossible for many, many years. I mean, Jules Verne wrote about this
Yeah.
eons ago,
Yeah.
but nobody ever thought that it could be possible. And the fact that we did it was just amazing to me. Like
Yep.
I can't fathom those nutters who say, "Oh, it was all fake." That that Stanley Kubrick did
It would
it.
have taken too much. It would have taken so much more effort to fake it. Honestly.
But if you think about it, the effort and the lying that would have to come from everyone.
400,000
about
people would all have to
everybo-
agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't subscribe to that at all, as you know. I don't.
Well, my favorite joke about the conspiracy, especially of Stanley Kubrick being the one behind it, is that, well, yeah, of course, Stanley Kubrick did direct the moon landing, but he was such a perfectionist that he insisted on shooting on location.
Yeah.
So that's my reply to that.
Yeah, but in his own right, Stanley Kubrick is a great director in his own
Oh
right.
yeah, no, it's a fantastic filmmaker.
Yeah. No, but do you have any more final thoughts on this magnificent film?
This was not necessarily the film I expected the first time I saw it. But it ended up being the film that it needed to be. I enjoyed it for all the same reasons then that I enjoyed it over again this time, and have thoroughly enjoyed our discussion about it, and learning that we have the right stuff yet to look forward to.
Yeah.
We'll have to prepare that one to be a 2-part episode of your show, I reckon, because the right stuff is about 3+ hours long. So
Oh my God, is it?
yeah,
I realize that.
it's a long movie. So
We're not gonna fit that.
not into
I
this
mean,
space. We'll have
yeah,
to we'll have to split it apart.
I mean,
Um,
we could, but
it would be a
we'll figure it out.
long podcast.
We'll
But
figure it
no,
out.
I love this film, and I love it more having seen it a second time.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, you've seen it what twice, right? You've seen
Yeah,
it
just
twice.
twice. Yeah.
I love it so much that I've seen it multiple times.
Oh, good.
I've seen it like eight or nine times.
That's awesome. That's
I think
awesome.
it's just, I think it's just great. And to me, it was really a shame that, um, well, it did get a couple Oscars for sound design, obviously,
Yeah.
but I really thought that it should have got a nomination for directing.
Yep.
And as far as I know, it didn't get one, so it's all right. But
Yeah, it's incredibly well directed for I mean we talked about each of the reasons why the way it's framed, the way it's shot, the way the choices that were made, when sound plays a part, when sound doesn't, all of it coming together is just it makes for a just go watch the movie, y'all.
yeah, it's great. I mean,
Yeah.
go watch it. I don't know if it's on any streaming services, but if it is, rent it, go watch it, do whatever you have to go see this amazing movie, because it really shows you what the human spirit is capable of doing if they want to accomplish a great thing. And landing on
And
the
in
moon
light of
to
tragedy.
right, and landing on the moon to us is really one of the greatest human achievements that there ever was.
Yep.
So go check it out if you haven't seen it. But if the good folks who are watching us talk right now, good on you for watching us talk for almost 2 hours.
Yeah, of course.
But if the good folks who are watching us talk right now want to, talk to you about anything, where would be the best place for them to do that online?
All right. Well, there's one point of entry. It makes it easy for everyone, and that's me on Twitter at DANDECKR under the moniker the Commodore. You can find me on Twitter, and pretty much everything flows from there. You can hear all about my podcast and all the other stuff that I do just by following me there.
Yeah, guys, and if you want to talk to me, I'm also on Twitter. I'm at Creek Fanatic 88. There is my home base. You'll find links to my three podcasts, soon to be three podcasts, and this very same YouTube channel. There's a link to that. You can also check out my weekly now Star Trek reviews because I'm reviewing the original series for the first time ever on
Nice.
this very channel. So those happen every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can look forward to that coming later this week. But
Nice.
I'd like to thank Dan very, very much for sitting down with me and having this amazing conversation about First Man. But until next time, as always, I'll see you when I see you.
So much happened here, and so much is about to.